This week on Q&A, our guest is Michael Fauntroy, a political commentator with his website michaelfauntroy.com. He also teaches graduate students at George Mason University.
Michael Fauntroy, how would you describe what you do for a living?
Well, I'm an educator professionally. I'm on the faculty at the School of Public Policy at George Mason University, so I teach graduate students courses in American government and urban policy and that sort of thing. But, you know, I'm also interested in speaking to the larger world, so I try to do as much media as I can, and I write a little bit, column kind of things on the Huffington Post and my own website. So I'm somebody who is trying to go beyond just the ivory tower walls of academia to speak to a larger audience. So that's a good deal of it. And the Huffington Post and the column writing stuff, well, the Huffington Post and my own website, in fact, came about out of some frustration. You know, I'm writing columns and submitting them to newspapers all across the country, and not one was published. Or I got one published by the Topeka Capital Journal years ago, and I was just so frustrated by it all, I decided to go out and start writing my own columns on my own website. Happened to meet somebody who knew someone at Huffington Post, and next thing you know, I was there. And so that opportunity has helped to open up a lot of other things as well. Give
us an example of what that does do for you when you are on a website like Huffington Post.
It's actually pretty amazing. I have come to learn that many news producers and bookers go to the Huffington Post, and if they see something very interesting, they'll call you. And there have been a number of times when I've ended up on television or radio talking about a particular issue. And one of the things that I learned in talking with the producer is that, well, I read what you did on what you wrote on Huffington Post. And so it's a tremendous venue in that regard. And my being located here in D.C. also helps as well.
Fourth generation Washingtonian?
Yes, yes.
And I love it.
Very proud of that, by the way.
And I love it at the end of one of your sheets on your website. You are the nephew of Walter Fountroy.
Yes, and that is, I do that tongue-in-cheek, but also, you know, to honor my father. If I had $1 for every time someone assumed that I was Walter Fauntroy's son, I'd be a very wealthy man. And so I just want to gently sort of clear that up for some who may not know. My first job ever, I was working on the grounds crew at the Capitol here in the summer of 1983, pulling weeds and cutting grass and raking brush and all that kind of thing. And there was some mix-up on my start date. And I was supposed to start on a Monday. I didn't actually get there on a Tuesday. And my supervisor, who I met for the very first time, in our very first conversation, went on and on and on about how I'm not allowed to go up to the Rayburn building to see my father during the day, that I'm here to work, and all this kind of stuff. And I'd been through this before, so I just knew to just do my work and go on with it. It's not like I intended to go and traipse around the building to find my uncle anyway, because he has a job to do, right? So 4 or 5 weeks in, somebody tells him that actually Walter Fountroy is his uncle, not his father. And he pulled me aside and said, you know, why didn't you tell me this? You know, you're too busy yelling at me. You know, I was 16 at the time. I didn't have any experience in the workplace and didn't really understand it all. So I just sort of let it roll off my back.
So what's the relationship of your father to Walter Fauntroy?
My father, Kenneth, is 2 years younger than my uncle Walter, and they're right next to each other in a long group of brothers and sisters.
How many are there in that family?
Originally as many as 8. Now I think 5 are still with us.
So what's the difference between you? Well, first, before we go any farther, Walter Fauntroy was
a hero of mine. I don't have many, but I've had a chance to look firsthand at what it means to be committed to something greater than yourself, and to see how people commit their lives to trying to make things better for others. And I've seen the sincerity in that. And I've come to believe as a result that politics is an honorable profession. Now, I know that's not the prevailing wisdom these days, but I've seen it with my own eyes, and I know better. So he is born February 6, 1933 here in Washington, D.C., segregated city at the time. He was a child prodigy. He went on to Virginia Union University, where he met Martin Luther King Jr., who was traveling through Petersburg on his way to seminary. And that sparked a friendship that lasted until King's assassination. He represented King in the Southern Christian Leadership Council. He was a Washington bureau chief and civil rights organizer, leader, very well known in that regard. 20 years in Congress from 71 to 90, founding member of the Congressional Black Caucus. You know, toward the end of 2009, we just recently celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Free South Africa movement. He was a prime mover in that. And he's someone who's still traveling around the world, you know, just retired early this year after 50 years as pastor of New Bethel Baptist Church on the corner of 9th and S here in D.C., the church where I was christened and married, and around the corner from where I live right now. Also, I live, my wife and I and our 2 kids live in the house, excuse me, that my father and his family grew up in. And so, you know, family's a big deal to me.
I read somewhere, maybe you wrote this, that Walter Fountroy met Martin Luther King when Martin Luther King was 22. And if I figure it right, Martin Luther King would today be 80 and your uncle's about 76.
76, yes, yes, yes.
So tell us about, before we go any farther, about your father and what's he done, and your mom.
Well, my father has been retired. He was at the Department of Justice for years as a program analyst. He graduated Central State College in May of 1957 and was born in 1935, graduated from Cardozo High School here in the district, swam, played football like a lot of people his age during that era, big in athletics. And my mother, Sarah Kathleen Moore Fountroy, I won't tell you when she was born, but she was born in North Carolina, Burlington, spent part of her early years in Connecticut, and before returning to Burlington to graduate high school. And she is someone also who, you know, she had a lot of foresight for someone so young. Shortly after graduating high school, she left and came to D.C. And you know, we haven't talked a lot about that. But one of the things I do remember her saying was there were no opportunities there. And she didn't want to just do what they did, what black women of a certain age at that period did. And she wanted something different for her life. So she came here, worked, met my father. They got married in 1963. I came along a few years after that, my brother 2 years after me. And my mother was home for a long time while we were coming up, and then started school, finished a bachelor's degree and then 2 master's degrees before beginning a career as a librarian at Howard University.
And you have a PhD from Howard University.
Absolutely, and a master's degree. A lot of connections, a lot of family connections to Howard. My eldest uncle, William Williams, a retired civil engineer. He graduated from Howard. He was a Tuskegee Airman, and he dropped out of high school to enlist and worked his way through college and was one of the senior engineers in helping to develop the Metro Rail system here in D.C. And he's someone for whom I have a great deal of love and respect. Let
me go to something that I read that you said, wrote, and this is way out of context. I don't want you to, because you talk about your love for politics. Quote, as a cynic who views almost everything in political terms, unquote.
Yeah, you know, what's the saying go? If all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Well, for me, it's difficult not to view things in anything other than political terms. And by that I mean, you know, when I look at the debate about whatever's going on in the world, I'm thinking about the political angle of it, not the legitimacy of not the policy angle. And that's an important distinction to me, because there's the merits of the policy or demerits of the policy on the one hand, but there's also the political back and forth that will determine the extent to which the meritorious natures of the policy will actually be revealed and enacted into law. And so it's hard to not become cynical, or at least skeptical, and perhaps I should have said skeptical, about the process when you see good ideas continually stifled and bad ideas occasionally slip through. And I think that happens far too frequently. You know, politically, we focus on a number of things that, to me, don't have a lot to do with the real needs of the people. And so, and again, given my own family and ideological and personal, you know, orientation, I'm much more concerned about the needs of the people.
What's your political label? Do you have one?
Well, I'm ideological, but I'm not partisan. And I know for some people that may be splitting hairs, but I see myself as left of center politically. You know, I want a single-payer healthcare system, for example. But I'm not rigid. You know, I think, and that, some of that is because of your academic training. Because if you're well-trained academically, you understand that you have to look at all sides of the angle, all sides of the issue before you decide which way you want to go. Now, that the decision you make in terms of which way you want to go may be guided by your own ideology, and that's fine. But I do think you have to be cognizant of all views, or at least as many as possible.
On your website, I'm going to read back to you what you say, and I want you to define it. You say michaelfauntroy.com, telling it like it is. What, I mean, this whole slogan that you have up here obviously came from somewhere, so
Right.
explain it.
Well, part of it is Howard Cosell. You recall Howard Cosell,
Sure.
the great sportscaster, and he always talked about he was just telling it like it is. And I really do believe that our political discourse is improved when people speak the truth as they see it, as opposed to trying to filter through, trying to, you know, make sure that they're still locked into their own ideological view. So you got to call it as it is. Each situation is different. There may be similarities, and if there's similarities, you have to acknowledge that. But each situation is different, and I think as a result of that, you have to call it as it is.
Then you say no spin.
Correct. I'm absolutely driven crazy by some of the stuff I see on television and hear on the radio by people who are clearly being guided, at least, by talking points that are provided by some other operation, and who are intent on spinning the public. And so what I want people to know when they come to my site, that they will read something that is not intended to spin them, but is but is designed for the express purpose of expressing my own opinion about the issue, and then leaving it up to you to decide whether or not you think I know what I'm talking about. And that's something I think is very important, and I emphasize in my classes all the time. When I say something that could be construed as commentary, I make it a point to say to my class, listen, this is my view. You don't have to accept it. I'm not trying to indoctrinate you. I just want to give you my sense of it, and then we can talk about your own position on it.
When do you hear spin the most often?
Well, I think there are two places. One, obviously there's the political ad operation, which exists for the sole purpose of spinning. But I do think that the evening cable news shows, and I have appeared on some of these shows, for disclosure, I'm not trying to take myself out of this. You know, I've participated at some level, though not frequently. I think there's also too much spin in that. I think, you know, the other part of it is too often on some of these shows, they're just chasing the same story, covering the same. Everybody's talking about the same story at the same time when there's so much else going on in the world. Now, I do know that there are some stories that merit immediate coverage, and that's just the sort of way it works out. And I understand that and I accept that. But there's too much of a beating a dead horse thing in some respects.
The next thing you say on your website is no stupidity.
There's a lot of stupid stuff on the internet, and there's a lot of stupid stuff that's said on television and radio, and I just try to avoid stupidity.
No axes to grind.
I am ideological, but I'm not partisan. I'm not carrying a flag for anyone but myself.
No hidden agendas.
Don't have any hidden agendas either. Again, this website is designed for me to express my own position. I do so to the best extent possible and leave it up to others to decide what's going on. I'm not trying to rule the world, if you will.
Just provocative commentary.
At least I try to be provocative. I have gotten some interesting responses to some of what I've written, some of which leads me to wonder if they actually read or understood what I was trying to say or trying to write.
Give us an example.
Well, you know, much of the heated stuff I get in response to things I've written has to do with race. Let's take the presidential campaign last year, for example. And for disclosure's sake, I should say I voted for President Obama, and in past years have contributed money to his senatorial campaign, for example. But I was skeptical first of his capacity to win because I just wasn't sure that the country was ready to do that. I believed that I would see an African-American president in my lifetime. I just wasn't sure it would be in 2008. But I was also disappointed in the extent to which issues of race and inequality were never sufficiently discussed. So when I wrote about that frustration and my skepticism about how committed he is to racial justice and solving inequality and that sort of stuff, I got hammered pretty good. But I was fine with it because I spoke my own truth, and if people disagree with it, then that's fine.
Then the last thing you ask, you have a question on that as we telling it like it is, no spin, no stupidity, no axes to grind, no hidden agendas, just provocative political commentary. Are you ready to go beyond conventional wisdom? Question mark.
Well, yeah, that I try to look at issues and write about issues in a way that goes beyond just what you could get anywhere else. You know, I may not always be successful, but that's the goal, and that's what I try to do.
And then in the first, this must be your bio page, Michael Fauntroy is a political commentator for the new millennium, part professor, part analyst, all truth.
I should say all my truth. Truth is a relative thing, right? In some cases. Yeah, you know, I really do think this is an opportunity for new voices to get seen and get heard, rather. And that's one of the things I'm trying to do with saying, listen, you can go to the people you've always gone to for analysis, and that's certainly your choice. But if you want a different voice, if you want something new, then check me out.
You wrote a lot about race in the campaign. First, grade Barack Obama from your standpoint.
Overall?
Just overall, right now, how do you feel about him?
I give him a solid B. I think he's dropped the ball on some things, but I think, you know, I believe he's sincere. I believe he wants to remake the order, the overall international order, and reshape America's place in it, and I certainly think that's appropriate. He has a very difficult job with the international part of that because he's trying to sort of undo some of the problems that were created, I believe, by the previous administration. And so, you know, I support what he's trying to do. I think he's doing as well as he can, although, you know, nobody's perfect.
You said that you agree with Eric Holder's comment that we're a nation of cowards.
Yes.
When it comes to the discussion of race.
Yes. Well, listen, and in that particular column, you know, I'm saying that Eric Holder's comments were accurate and needed to be spoken, and the president's response to those comments was disappointing at best and, you know, cowardly at worst.
But I was trying to figure out a way that...
well, let me just say a couple things about that quickly. I think that the only time we really talk as a nation about race is when there's a crisis of some sort, when a police officer arrests a professor, or when Rodney King is beaten by cops, or when there's something going on, when Susan Smith says that some black man took her car and kids, and we later find out that was not the case. You know, and there are only discussions when there are crises. And I think that's the wrong time to have the conversations. I think that's the wrong time to try to get the ball rolling to move the country to where it should be. And so for me, for Eric Holder to make those comments, it was a wake-up call and something I think people should not have jumped up and down about.
But there's an implication in this whole business of the race discussion that something's not being said. Remember during the Bill Clinton administration, we had that whole discussion on race.
Right.
We've probably carried more about race on this network than any place ever.
Right.
It's just discussed here all the time.
Yes.
But what is not, in your opinion, being said? What's missing in the discussion?
I think there's something missing in terms of what's being said, and I think there's something missing in terms of what's being done. With regard to what's being said, I really don't think that the country has a real sense of what some of the problems are. We think we know, but you know, there are systemic issues. One of the books that I'm reading right now is More Than Just Race by Harvard professor William Jewis Wilson, and it's a great book that in my opinion, speaks to some of the conservative arguments that, in some respects, these are sociological racial issues. And Wilson is arguing that it's actually more about structure. And so we don't talk about the structure at all. We don't talk about the fact that roughly 46% of the 2 million people incarcerated in the United States are African American. And that doesn't, there has to be, in my opinion, some sort of structural explanation for this. Otherwise, the explanation is black people are pathological and they're just going to end up in jail, and so we shouldn't do much in terms of public policy because it's a waste of money. And so I think that we need to do a better job of explaining the context in which this exists. And I don't think we do it enough. This is a great venue, but unfortunately, in my opinion, there's not enough. There's not enough behind, not enough in the cavalry.
I tried to figure out some way to do this to get you to, put it into context. And so what I did, and this, you may not like this, but I went back and found some quotes from Jeremiah Wright. Mm-hmm. And the reason I did that was because he created all this, flailing about back during the mm-hmm. campaign. And I wondered, if I read some of it, if you could tell me whether you think he's right or wrong. Mm-hmm. I'm reading it, it's not done with his emotion and all that stuff. So let me this is a quote, I actually found this on Wikipedia, and they have a bunch of quotes that were carried in some of his speeches.
And by the way, if you were one of my students and you wrote a paper, submitted a paper to me that cited Wikipedia, we'd have problems.
But this is a quote that you can find. The quote itself is accurate.
Okay.
So here it goes. And the United States of America government, when it came to treating her citizens of Indian descent fairly, she failed. She put them on reservations. When it came to treating her citizens of Japanese descent fairly, she failed. She put them in internment camps, prison camps. When it came to treating her citizens of African descent fairly, America failed. She put them in chains. The government put them on slave quarters, put them on auction blocks, put them in cotton fields, put them in inferior schools, put them in substandard housing, put them in scientific experiments, put them in the lowest paying jobs, put them outside the equal protection of the law, kept them out of their racist bastions of higher education, and locked them into positions of hopelessness and helplessness. Is there anything you disagree with there?
To the extent that I disagree, it would be that he didn't acknowledge that there are exceptions and that there are examples of African Americans who've met with great success, some of whom have done so after being granted access to some of these institutions that he referred to. But I think, listen, the history is what it is, and I think it's, and by the way, I hate that phrase, I can't believe I just used it, but it just drives me crazy. But our history is irrefutable. We did do, internment camps, and we did create reservations, and we did do this institution of slavery, and we have created separate systems, one that left African Americans holding the short end of the stick. So it's difficult to quibble with any of that, but I do think that we've come very far as a country, and we need to acknowledge the successes, but at the same time we cannot ignore the lessons of our history.
He goes on to say the government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, 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 not God Bless America, as you know, GD America.
Right.
That's in the Bible. He says this. For killing innocent people. God damn America for treating our citizens as less than human. God damn America, as long as she tries to act like she is God and she is supreme. The United States government has failed the vast majority of her citizens of African descent. You know how incendiary that was.
Right. No, without
People
question.
ran the clips and.
Right. What's interesting about that, and we're not in church. We're not in the context in which this was said. And as you know, preachers are also entertainers. And I think, and I don't know this to be true, but I think there are a number of pastors around the country who've said incendiary things in their pulpits without regard to race and color to make a point. I think that's what he's tried to do there.
But was there anything, did he say anything wrong?
Let's go back through it again.
Well, let's see. The government gives the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law and then wants us to sing God Bless
Yeah,
America.
let me say a couple things about that. First, on a per capita basis, the United States incarcerates more people than any other country in the world. All right, and some of that is out of an explosion of our get tough anti-drug policies that were passed in the 1980s and since, including 3 strikes. That's a fact. I don't think that there's any refuting that. We talked earlier about Eric Holder. Eric Holder said something years ago that I think is very notable. You know, there's always been this talk about the extent to which drugs have been allowed to be couriered into black communities around the country. And, you know, there are debates about the extent to which that's true. But Eric Holder once said, and I agree with this, somebody can bring the drugs in, but that doesn't mean we have to use it. And that doesn't mean we have to sell it. And I think that that context has to be added as well.
By the way, you said something about Wikipedia. I have read Wikipedia sites to our guests many times, and I've never once had a guest say that's not accurate.
Well, I'm not saying it's not accurate. I'm saying that Wikipedia, because it is an open source and anybody can go in and write anything, I think it can compromise the legitimacy or validity of something that comes through. Now, it's better now than it used to be. I've been at George Mason since 2002 and taught in other places before then. When I first started seeing quotes, you know, seeing my students cite Wikipedia, I'm like, what is this? And I go to it, and some of this stuff was just patently false. So I'm sort of I'm relaying to you some of my long-held concerns about open source research, but I don't have any problems with what you read.
It's not that nothing ever goes wrong. We were definitely involved here with several conversations with John Siegenthaler over the fact that Wikipedia site accused him of being,
I remember that, yeah.
I'm not even going to repeat what they accused him. It turned out to be very wrong, and the person that was doing it had to admit it and then back down from it. But I just wanted to hear you respond. Here's some more quotes from Jeremiah Wright. The United States government lied about their belief that all men were created equal. The truth is they believed that all white men were created equal. The truth is they did not even believe that white women were created equal in creation or civilization. The government had to pass an amendment to the Constitution to get white women to vote. Then the government had to pass an Equal Rights Amendment to get equal protection under the law for women. The government still thinks a woman has no rights over her own body, and between Uncle Clarence, meaning Clarence Thomas, who sexually harassed Anita Hill, these are in quotes, and a closeted Klan court that is a throwback to the 19th century, handpicked by Daddy Bush, Ronald Reagan, Gerald Ford. Between Clarence and that stacked court, they are about to undo Roe versus Wade, just like they're about to undo affirmative action. The government lied in its founding documents, and the government is still lying today. Governments lie. Is there anything in there you disagree with?
You're killing me, Brian. Let's go back to the beginning. I teach this in my course in American government. You know, we have a Constitution, and then we have the first 10 amendments, which represent what we call the Bill of Rights. And then we have an amendment process. And a number of amendments have been added, including those about equal protection, right to vote, women's suffrage, and so on. It's irrefutable that the Constitution did not, in terms of voting, did not include white women, and of course didn't include slaves. You know, there's no questioning that. When you look at the history of the Constitution, it also didn't include. It was intended for people who were wealthy enough to own land. And the thinking behind that was those who were wealthy enough and smart enough to own land could be smart enough to help run the country. So I don't have any problem with that. So now some of the other stuff is hyperbole, and you know I'm not going to touch that.
What do you think of Clarence Thomas?
I think he's someone with a very interesting and commendable personal story. I am obviously not on the same side of the fence ideologically. But he's done on the court pretty much what I expected him to. I'm not surprised by any of the decisions, any of his decisions.
You wrote a lot, as we said earlier, about the black vote in the Obama campaign, and it turns out that he got 95% of the black vote.
Yeah, big surprise.
The biggest, I think, in history. The one that came the closest with LBJ in '64, he got 94% of the black vote.
And also, it should be noted that Al Gore got 91%, I believe, and he outdid Clinton in both Clinton's presidential campaigns.
So what is it about the black human in this country that loves the Democratic Party?
it's not as much about loving the Democratic Party as not having a better alternative. You know, we for all intents and purposes, are a two-party country. There's smaller third parties around. And I think that African Americans are, and I write this in the book, Republicans and the Black Vote. You know, I hear all the time, why is it African Americans always vote Democratic? And then as I was doing the research on this book, one of the things that I used to hear from African American Republican activists was, we're trying to bring the party back to its roots because, as you know, African Americans were probably more so supportive of the Republican Party during the Reconstruction, early Reconstruction and abolitionist period than they are for the Democrats now. But the reality is African Americans ideologically are where they have always been. That is to say, center, center-left. And if you look at the evolution of the parties, the Republicans have moved away from where they were, and the Democrats have moved away from where they were, and Democrats are more closely aligned to African Americans, in part because they are no longer where they used to be. And so to the extent that we can say African Americans love Democrats is because Democrats have traditionally been closer, I shouldn't say traditionally, over the course of the last half century or so, or nearly half century, have been closer to African Americans than the Republicans. And in elections, it's pretty much a zero-sum game. You know, I have to vote for the person who's closest to me ideologically or closest to me on the issues, because there's not anyone out there that's completely with me on the issues.
The book that you were talking about, Republicans and the Black Vote,
Yes.
was written what year?
The paperback was published in 2008. The hardback was published in 2007.
So why would you want to write about Republicans?
Well, a couple of reasons. One, I'm trying to get tenure, and you have to publish. And you know, I've always considered myself a writer, and as an academic, one of the things you want to do is try to find and deal with issues that aren't easily addressed or have not been addressed in any significant way. And during the course of my research, I really didn't find very many books that book-length treatments of this issue, and that is the relationship between African American voters and the Republican Party. And I have to emphasize that because too often I've had people assume that this is a book about Black Republicans, and it's not. It's a book about the Republican Party and African American voters. And I emphasize that also because I've had some unfortunate incidents in which people have assumed that because I am an African American and have written a book called Republicans and the Black Vote, that therefore I must be a Republican. You
know, you look back in history, in 1944, Thomas Dewey got 40% of the black vote
Right.
in the country.
Right.
He was a Republican, and you got charts like that in the book.
Yeah, you know, one of the things I wanted to do was lay out, to the extent that the data would allow, you know, how Republican presidential candidates have done with the black vote. And, you know, Richard Nixon in 1960, far better than anyone would believe now, given our understanding of President Nixon. But when Vice President Nixon ran in 1960, he got about a third of the black vote.
So could you put your finger on the moment, the time, the event that something happened that began the shift?
Well, one of the points that I make in the book is that it wasn't just one moment. There was an evolution that actually I trace back to the Republicans beginning to get a little weak-kneed about Reconstruction. So you can go all the way back there, but if you want to come into the mid-20th century or so, you can begin to look at things like Harry Truman desegregating the armed forces. And one of the things that has to be noted here is that I believe two things happened. One, the Republicans began to retreat from some of their commitments, but also as a result of black migration in the early 20th century, Democrats began to get new black voters that they had to contend with. And so there was a push away from Republicans and a pull among Northern Democrats, I believe, that helped to lead this. And the final straw, I would say, was the '64 Goldwater campaign, which was just an abomination to most black people.
For a moment, some personal stuff. You're married to a woman that is a lawyer and is at the Discovery Channel.
Yes. My Lisa, yes, she is a wonderful woman. I am lucky because I married up. She probably can't say the same thing. Yes, she's a lawyer. I'm very proud of her. She's the highest ranking African-American attorney in the history of the company. It's a multi-billion-dollar operation, and I'm very proud of her and all that she's done there. She's been there for 13, 14 years or so, and she's doing very well.
So why did you name your daughter Sunshine?
Well, that's not her official name. Her official name is Logan, but I call her Sunshine every single day because she's a bright and sunny baby. And, well, not baby anymore, she's 2, you know, but she's a sweetie.
How old is her brother Brett?
2, they're twins, born July 8th, 2007, Sunday evening, 10:29 and 10:30 p.m. And they're great. You know, we're so lucky. They're healthy, they're smart, very smart. My daughter's a bit of a diva, but she's smart as a whip. And just watching them grow has just been a tremendous honor.
Back to some more issues. In 2007, you wrote about the Imus fallout and lessons for Black America.
Right. Well, that, you know, I can always tell how things are going on in the world on racial issues by my media schedule. And when I'm doing a lot of television in particular, that means something's going on. And the Imus episode is certainly one of those examples. Again, we only talk about race when there's a crisis. And Imus is one of those examples. He says some ridiculous things on television. We go crazy. We have this conversation while the dust is still in the air. Then when the dust settles, we move on to the next thing. And, you know, nothing really happens.
Well, let me give you just a brief analysis and get your reaction to it. The Reverend Al goes after him. CBS fires him.
MSNBC.
They have to pay him off, and
right.
You know, some $20 million or something. I mean,
right.
You don't know for sure.
Right.
He's now back on television, back on the radio. Probably has multi-year contracts. So what did we gain in all that? Nothing.
Nothing. I mean, he sat out a little bit, but you know, I guess to the extent that we gained something is his new show configuration includes some non-white faces. But you know, again, I think that we missed an opportunity, and part of what I'm trying to do is explain to people that the educational process is how we change views on people, and we can't just educate in times of crisis.
Well, go back. What was the statistic? 42% of Black men are in prison?
The number is somewhere in the neighborhood of 42, 43% of African Americans are incarcerated. Now, that does not include those who are on parole or under some other form of supervision. Okay, we're talking massive numbers of Black men engaged in one way or another in the criminal justice system.
What's your take on why?
Well, I think it's systemic. And I also think it's personal. Now, from a systemic standpoint, we've never really fixed education in America. We've never really fixed the placement of jobs in a way that give people opportunities. I mentioned William Jewis Wilson earlier. He wrote a book about a little more than a decade or so ago called When Work Disappears. Great book. And to me, it just sort of lays out what happens when opportunities are non-existent. So if you have people who are not well educated, have no real opportunities, and live in areas in which there are no jobs, all types of social dysfunction is allowed to spread. And so that's the systemic part of it that I think is a real problem. We cannot ignore the personal aspects of this. We have too many fatherless children. We have too much going on in our community that does not lead or encourage achievement. One of the real disappointing things to me, and this happened to me when I was an elementary school kid, it happened years before I got to elementary school, and it's continuing on to this day, is this really unfortunate thing that I have no idea where it came from. But on too many Black schoolyards in America right now, kids that want to do well and are trying to do well are mocked with what I believe to be a most unfortunate mock, and this is it. You're trying to be white, as if trying to be educated is trying to be white.
Where did that come from? I mean, that's been around for a while.
Brian, if I knew I could solve some of these problems. I don't know. I don't know. It's frustrating, it's demeaning, it's unfortunate, but it's also depressing to kids who are unsure of themselves and want to belong. So I think that, we talk about the power of words. Words can help derail kids, in my opinion. And those are some of the words that can do the job.
So if you had by the way, you do have a forum, and we're recording this before you give your speech, but it'll be seen by the public after you give your speech at George Mason. That's a program called Visions. And I got on the website, saw there are 8 different speeches during the school year, and you have to stand in front of an audience and talk about what?
Well, let me back up for a second. The Vision series, which is something that's done by the Provost Office at Mason, is designed to feature faculty members and their research. So faculty members pick the topic based on whatever it is that they're doing research on, or whatever else is on their mind. In this case, I got the invitation back in March, and I was trying to figure out what I would talk about. And I'm interested in race and politics. That's what I'm writing about. That's what I do. And so I'm trying to wrap my arms around and my brain around this idea that this is a post-racial America now that Barack Obama is president. So the topic is post-racial politics, post-racial America, and the impact on politics. And so that's what I'm going to discuss. I'm going to try to give people an understanding from my perspective of what post-racial means.
What does it mean?
Well, I think post-racial is a term that is used in polite company to say we as a country are beyond or moving beyond race as a factor. Now, on the surface, I think that sounds great, but I think we have to be careful so as to not prematurely hoist the mission accomplished sign with regard to America's racial issues. And I think it's also important that we not cast aside the history that helped bring this country to a point where it could elect someone like Barack Obama. And so when we say post-racial, just as when we say post-civil rights, we have to be careful so as to not use that as casting aspersions on those who really given their lives to help put this country where it is. People including my Uncle Walter, for example.
Uncle Walter Fountroy.
Yes.
20 years, non-voting delegate?
Yes.
Do you think we'll ever have a representative in this country from the District of Columbia?
Yes.
A voting representative?
Yes, absolutely. Listen, it's the right thing to do. We have a circumstance now in which our current Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, who served for nearly 20 years now, is trying to shepherd through Congress a bill that would grant the district's delegate full voting representation. What we've had in recent years is a piecemeal approach depending on who's in charge of Congress, who's in charge of the House, whereby some special rule has been created so that the delegate of the District of Columbia and the delegates from the territories and the resident commissioner from Puerto Rico can vote on the floor. But if their vote constitutes the margin of victory, then there has to be an automatic revote in which they cannot participate. And that was something that was first created when the Democrats were in control in the early 90s, but done away with when the Republicans took control. And so we need something that will be in place regardless of who's in charge of Congress.
This book, Home Rule or House Rule, what year did you do this and why?
It was published in 2003. It was a revised version of my dissertation. I did it because it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. You know, if you're born and raised in this city and you pay attention to politics, particularly if you're of a certain age, you understand congressional interference and congressional intervention.
Any other capital city in the world where citizens can't vote?
I should know this. I was at the Congressional Research Service for a few years and did some research on this. No, to my recollection, even in Havana and Caracas and other places around the world, the residents of the capital city do have some voting representation. Many of them have complete autonomy. And there's some special district like Canberra in Australia in which there is some federal-local relationship. But to my knowledge, they all have some voting representation in their national legislatures.
From your knowledge, could you live in any other country in the world which is multiracial and get a better deal than you get in the United States? I don't mean a deal. I mean, is a, you know, where it would be a better world for the different races.
I don't know. I hadn't thought about that. You know, for
That's
me,
not to imply that.
No, I understand.
I just wondered if folks ever think about, oh, I'm going to move to this country because I'm going to be treated a lot better.
You know, it's very curious you would ask that. I don't want to. I'm going to deal with it, but I want to talk about something else first. I know of gays that have moved from the United States to Canada, for example, because they feel they can get a better deal. Okay, but just to, as you put it, but
it's a bad question.
But in terms of race, I'm not sure. You know, I mean, I guess if you're an African American, you can find a capital city in Africa somewhere, and if you
yeah, but I'm thinking more or less of where it's multiracial, not just
right. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, listen, race is endemic everywhere.
Why do you think that? Why?
I think because we're conditioned to understand and appreciate and embrace people who look like us, and so when we come across people who don't, we don't really know how to mix. You know, my brother-in-law and his wife got married in France in 2002. She's French. Her mother is from Africa and her father is French. And after that trip, my wife and I met some friends in Mallorca in the Mediterranean in Spain. And we're walking along the beach, and it's blazing hot outside, and we found a guy pushing a cart with some ice cream. And I buy an ice cream bar, and on the wrapping of the bar is the most offensive imagery of an African. Plate lips, huge eyes, a spear, a grass skirt, all of this kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, I'm in Spain. Why is this, why am I seeing this in Spain? What's going on in Spain? And so, you know, Spain is probably no more or less indicative of the rest of the world than any other country. And so for me, race is just the kind of thing that is part of the human condition. And my interest in it as it relates to public policy is to focus on making sure that race is not used to disadvantage some at the expense advantage some at the expense of others.
You mentioned something that I wanted to ask you about because it's kind of a hidden spot in this town, the 700 or so people that work for the Congressional Reference Service.
Congressional Research Service.
Research Service.
Yes.
How long did you work there?
I worked there in two different iterations. The first in 1997, I did a summer internship while I was still in graduate school. And after I finished graduate school in 2000, I defended my dissertation and went to CRS and spent 2 years there before I took the job at George Mason. The Congressional Research Service, I like to call it the world's greatest political science department in some respects. Researchers, many of whom have PhDs. In fact, as a researcher, you probably can't get in the door anymore without a PhD in your field. People who do great research, nonpartisan research at the request of members and committees of Congress.
Can a member really just call up and say, I need a study on this?
Yes.
And you have to do it?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Happens all the time. People have their own research areas, and they build relationships with staff members, be they in personal staffs or committees of the members, because these staff members are calling CRS, and so who's the person that does X? Okay, and so you call that person, you say, well, listen, the member's interested in this. Do you have anything on this issue? And you may already have something. And if you don't, then the question becomes, well, can you get us something quickly on this? And it's very interesting. At times it can be very intense, but it's a great place.
But you can also remember times when a member will ask for a study and then release it to the press and get copy out of it. You know, Congressman so-and-so had a study done by the Congressional Research Service.
Well, yeah, that's one of the really, you know, I almost said we. You know, I've been going 7 years now. But those of us who work there jealously guard the nonpartisanship and want to make sure that the reports that are done by CRS are not used to facilitate a particular partisan end. That can't always be protected, but it's frowned upon, and that's why CRS reports are not made available to the public. The last thing we want, it's one thing for a member to stand up and hold a report done by a partisan think tank. It's another thing altogether to hold up a report from the Congressional Research Service that plays it straight. They have no axes to grind. They do no spin.
Sounds like something I read earlier.
Yeah, I mean, you know, CRS was a great experience for me. It helped improve my writing, and it helped get me to see even more so the importance of playing it straight.
But what happens if you're in the Congressional Research Service and you get a call from a congressman or congresswoman and says, I want the study done on this, and you're sitting there going, oh man, I don't want to do this?
Well, what you try to do is shape the request in a way that it can actually be done, and to be done in a timely fashion. It's not unusual to get a call at 4:30 on a Thursday afternoon when a member's saying, we need to have this done, can you get it to us tomorrow? And it may not be possible given the size and scope of the request. So the savvy, more veteran analysts there, researchers there, understand this and are often able to shape the request in a way that makes it manageable.
So where do you live in this area?
My wife and I live along the U Street corridor right off 9th Street, right around the corner from Uncle's old church.
So with the name Michael Fauntroy,
yes,
a well-known name in the District of Columbia,
yes,
the name Fountroy.
Yes.
I can remember the names the first time I came here years ago. Do you think in terms of someday if there is an opportunity you might run for that voting member of Congress from the District of Columbia?
Oh, Brian, the only job I've ever coveted is serving in Congress. It's the only job I've ever coveted.
That was an
appropriate
question for this discussion.
That and playing point guard for the Lakers, but that's not going to happen. It's the only. Listen, I am one of the few people that actually reveres the institution of Congress. I know those tunnels under the building back, like the back of my hand. I've seen it from a very small child. I played basketball in the house gym as a 6-year-old, and just revere the place and what it represents. It's not perfect. There are a number of problems with the place. It's far too partisan now, in my opinion. But at its best, Congress is the most incredible institution. So yeah, I'd love that job.
But I can see in that face right there, Walter Fountroy. I mean, there's a resemblance, and you know that.
Yes.
Does your dad look like him?
No. I get that a lot. I get that a lot. It's curious. The other thing I get is, you're so much taller than he is. Where did you get your size from? But I got that from my mother's side of the family.
So as a teaching government, American government at George Mason University,
yes,
which is in Virginia,
yes,
on the other side of the river, that class is in front of you. Is it usually graduate class?
Yes, only graduate students.
What's the thing when you set out to teach government, what is the overall mission for, what do you want them to know that you think they might not know?
Well, I want them to be very well focused on the institutions. If you understand how the institutions work, then you're better able to understand how a certain law got passed. I talked earlier about the importance of understanding the political part of this in addition to the policy part. It's one thing to shape great policy, but that policy will not be passed into law if the politics don't allow it. And so that's one of the things that I try to focus on. The other thing I try to focus on is getting students to understand that politics and government is participatory. And with interest groups and the money that's put in to influence and lobby members of Congress, there's a reason why things are the way they are. And so those are the two major things that I've been hammering on in recent years.
So you and your wife, one has a PhD, one has a law degree.
Yes.
Pretty visible.
She graduated from Georgetown, right? Not far from here, Georgetown Law School.
So as you walk around life, why do you think you did so well?
Well, we talked about this earlier too, but my father's a college graduate. My mother's a college graduate.
Well, let me stop you quickly. We haven't got much time. Why did they do well?
they were fortunate that they were, in my father's case, my father had an athletic scholarship, but he also had people around him who were pushing him in that direction.
Around him meaning?
Family, mentors, that sort of thing. And, it's not always easy, but if you recognize that what you see around you isn't necessarily what you want, and that there's a way to get what you want.
So if you go back even farther, what do you find? If you traced your ancestry?
I can go back into the late 19th century. What I have found is people who were able to take their own interest and desire for more, and when the opportunity presented itself, seize the opportunity. My mother, again, in her teens knew that staying in Burlington, North Carolina was not going to work for her. She wanted a different life and moved to D.C., not knowing anybody, and ultimately got a bachelor's degree and 2 master's degrees. So when you grow up in a household and this is what you see, and the people around you, in many cases, are college educated, if not graduated, certainly attended for a period, it just becomes a part of your DNA, and you understand that that's what the expectation is.
So do you have a favorite historian in your life? Do you have a favorite writer?
I was enthralled by Charles Hamilton Houston's biography of Adam Clayton Powell. And I first learned of that book watching this very network.
Watching him?
Watching you interview him, talking about that book.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah, it's got to be at least 15, 16 years ago. And so that's one of the books that stuck with me. David Levering Lewis's biography of W.E.B. Du Bois, who is an intellectual hero of mine, has been something that stuck with me also. It's interesting. I don't get a chance to read for pleasure anymore, because every time I'm reading for pleasure, I'm thinking this is time that I could be devoting to reading for my work. And so I don't get a chance to do very much fiction.
How old are you now?
43.
So that was about, it had to be almost 18 years ago. You were not very old. Anyway, we're out of time. Michael Fauntroy.
Thank you very much.
At michaelfauntroy.com.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed a great deal.
For a DVD copy of this program, call 1-877-662-7726. For free transcripts or to give us your comments about this program, visit us at qna.org. Q&A programs are also available as C-SPAN podcasts.